All in all, was being in the Stones a great gig, or was it hell?
It was both. Heaven and hell. Roller coaster ride. No, but seriously, it was mostly a lot of fun, but towards the end of my period with the Stones, it got very laborious and monotonous, and a lot of people, there were a lot of people around the Stones that seemed to drag them down and hold them back.
Yeah, I was quite surprised that Mick wanted to leave the band, but here they are. Yeah, it was difficult because we didn't find someone straight away. We tried lots of people. And
the summer of 1969 was thick with change. The air, charged with protests, political unrest, and countercultural rebellion, felt as though it might explode at any moment. For the Rolling Stones, the turbulence wasn't just societal, it was personal. Brian Jones, the golden-haired founder who once defined their image and sound, was drowning figuratively, long before he was found submerged in his swimming pool on July the 3rd. His creativity, once as boundless as the psychedelic trips that inspired their early explorations, had withered under the crushing weight of drugs and self-destruction.
Yeah, but there was no serious way that we can consider going on the road with Brian. So that was... but at the same time, nobody expected it to happen just like that.
Jones's death wasn't unexpected, and in many ways, it came as a relief to the band. He had already been pushed out of the group a month earlier, officially dismissed after missing recording sessions and rehearsals for too long. His inability to perform had become a liability. Brian couldn't function, Keith Richards admitted. He was fragile, we loved him, but we had to keep moving. The press framed it as an amicable departure.
About midnight, Jones went for a swim with his Swedish girlfriend, Anna Volin, and another friend, Mr. Frank Thorogood. After a time, Mr. Thorogood and the girl went back to the house. When they returned, they saw Jones at the bottom of the pool, and they pulled him out.
But those within the band knew it was a mercy killing. Letting him go was the only way they could survive.
Although it was a shock when it actually happened, nobody was really that surprised, too. There are people, I mean, I'm sure that everybody's got those feelings about certain people. Everybody knows people that you just have that feeling about they're not going to be 70 years old ever, you know. Not everybody makes it, you know.
2 days after Jones's death, the Rolling Stones performed a free concert in Hyde Park, their first major live performance in over 2 years. What had initially been planned as a grand reintroduction of the band turned into a public eulogy.
Okay, now listen. Now will you just cool it just for a minute? Because I really would like to say something for Brian.
The stage, adorned with simple backdrops, became a platform for grief. Mick Jagger, wearing a flowing white tunic, read from Percy Bysshe Shelley's Adonais to honour Jones. Peace, peace, he is not dead, he doth not sleep, he hath awakened from the dream of life.
Peace, peace, he is not dead, he doth not sleep, he has awakened from the dreams of life.
Butterflies were released into the air as a symbolic gesture, but many of them, too weak or disoriented, fell to the ground before taking flight. In the shadow of that elegy stood Mick Taylor, the 20-year-old guitarist who had quietly slipped into Jones's place. Taylor wasn't a man of grand entrances. He was soft-spoken, polite, and, in many ways, the polar opposite of the larger-than-life personalities that surrounded him. But when his fingers touched the guitar, they spoke volumes. His performance at Hyde Park was subdued yet promising. Though his role that day was largely to fill in the blanks, his contributions hinted at what was to come. His slide guitar on No Expectations, a song that had been one of Jones's final significant contributions to the band, carried a quiet reverence. Taylor wasn't there to mimic his predecessor. He was there to build on the foundation Jones had left behind. The Stones had spent much of the mid-1960s redefining what a rock band could be. They had dabbled in Baroque pop with As Tears Go By and flirted with psychedelia on their Satanic Majesty's request, but by 1969 they were shedding the experimentation in favour of something more primal. The blues had always been their backbone, and now, with Taylor in the fold, they were ready to dive back into it without hesitation. Taylor, who had grown up idolising players like B.B. King, Freddie King, and Elmore James, was the perfect catalyst. Recording for Let It Bleed was already well underway when Taylor joined, but his influence began to emerge even in its final stages. His slide guitar appeared on Country Honk, a countrified reworking of the hit single Honky Tonk Women, and his presence brought an earthy authenticity to Live With Me. The album's themes of decadence and disillusionment mirrored the changing times, as the hippie dream was beginning to sour, but its music was firmly grounded in blues, rock, and gospel influences. Taylor's contributions were subtle but essential. While Jones had brought exotic instrumentation like the sitar and marimba to earlier recordings, Taylor offered a different kind of depth, one rooted in feel rather than novelty. The band's 1969 US tour marked Taylor's true introduction to the world. It was their first major tour in 3 years, and the performances were raw, visceral, and at times chaotic. Taylor adapted quickly. His slide work on Love in Vain, a Robert Johnson cover, added a mournful dimension to the song that made it a standout in their setlist. During Midnight Rambler, he navigated the band's shifts between slow blues and frenzied rock with an ease that belied his youth. Jagger, who prowled the stage like a man possessed, leaned into Taylor's solos, using them as springboards for his own theatrical flourishes. Richards, always the rhythm anchor, found in Taylor a perfect foil, someone who could fill the gaps without stepping on his toes. But the tour's legacy would forever be overshadowed by Altamont. The free concert, held on December 6, 1969, at a racetrack east of San Francisco, was meant to be a celebration, a West Coast answer to Woodstock. Instead, it became a symbol of the darker side of the 1960s counterculture. The Hells Angels, hired as security, patrolled the grounds with heavy chains and sawed-off pool cues, creating an atmosphere of intimidation. As the Stones took the stage, tensions boiled over. During their performance of Under My Thumb, 18-year-old Meredith Hunter was stabbed and killed by an angel after pulling a gun during a scuffle. The chaos was captured on film for the documentary Gimme Shelter, and the images of a bloodied Hunter being dragged from the crowd haunted the band for years.
When they started messing over our bikes, they started it. I don't know if you think we pay $50 for them things or steal them or pay a lot for them or what. Ain't nobody gonna kick my motorcycle.
We didn't understand what was happening until it was too late, Jagger said later. It was like the dream turned into a nightmare right in front of us. For Taylor, Altamont was a brutal initiation into the band's darker reality. I wasn't used to that level of madness, he admitted. It was surreal. The tragedy of Altamont didn't derail the band. It pushed them further into the creative territory that would define the next few years. In 1970, they began working on Sticky Fingers, the first album to feature Taylor as a full-time member. It was also the debut of their iconic tongue and lips logo and the first release on their own label, Rolling Stones Records. By now, Taylor had fully integrated into the band's creative process, and his influence was unmistakable. Sway, one of the album's most powerful tracks, is driven by Taylor's guitar work. His solo, which snakes through the song like a slow-moving storm, transforms it from a standard blues lament into something cinematic. The brilliance of Sway wasn't just in its construction, it was in its restraint. Taylor's solo wasn't flashy, nor was it overly complex, but it carried the emotional weight of the song in a way that felt almost narrative. It wasn't just notes being played, it was pain and longing, stretched over the fretboard with a delicacy that only a guitarist of Taylor's caliber could achieve. Keith Richards, who often shied away from giving too much credit to anyone outside the core Jagger-Richards partnership, admitted that Taylor's contributions couldn't be ignored. He carried that song, I laid down the rhythm, but Mick made it fly. Then came Can't You Hear Me Knocking. What began as a tight, riff-driven rock track unexpectedly unraveled into a 7-minute odyssey, carried by Taylor's improvised soloing. Bobby Keys's saxophone kicked off the extended jam section, but it was Taylor's fluid, exploratory lead guitar that elevated the song to mythic status. The transition wasn't planned. As Richards put it, we just kept going and Mick took us somewhere. None of us wanted to stop. Taylor's playing meandered through blues and jazz phrases, never losing its direction but allowing itself the freedom to explore. The brilliance of Sticky Fingers wasn't confined to these larger-than-life moments. On Wild Horses, Taylor's slide guitar added a layer of tenderness, enhancing the song's melancholy tone without overpowering its acoustic simplicity. He had a way of knowing exactly when to step in and when to let silence do the work. His slide playing didn't fight for attention, it complemented everything around it, as if Taylor understood that the spaces between the notes were just as important as the notes themselves. Dead Flowers showed Taylor's ability to adapt to country-inflected rock. While on You Gotta Move, a raw blues number, his slide work oozed with the authenticity of a seasoned bluesman despite his young age.
Because like when they're coming out, you'll stop, boom. Yeah, but that's there. It doesn't come until the solo. No, I
know. Richards, often possessive about his role in the Stones' sound, began to let Taylor take the lead more frequently during this period. I knew when to step back and let Mick do his thing, Richards admitted. He had something I didn't. He could sing through the guitar. Sticky Fingers was a triumph, both critically and commercially. Released in April 1971, it topped the charts in the UK and the US, solidifying the Stones' status as the kings of rock in a post-Beatles world. But beneath the surface, the cracks in the band's foundation were beginning to form, and Taylor, despite his pivotal role in their success, was starting to feel the weight of those fractures. By the time they began recording Exile on Main Street, the Rolling Stones had fled the UK to avoid the country's crippling tax laws, setting up shop in the south of France at a mansion called Villa Nelcote. The sessions, infamous for their debauchery, became a kind of rock and roll myth. Heroin, late-night jam sessions, and an ever-rotating cast of musicians and hangers-on. The band was living on the edge, and it showed in their music. Unlike Sticky Fingers, which had been meticulously crafted, Exile was messy, sprawling and chaotic. But that chaos was its strength. The album's raw, unpolished sound captured the essence of a band pushing itself to the brink. For Mick Taylor, it was both a creative playground and a test of endurance. There was no structure, Taylor recalled. Some nights we'd play for hours and come away with nothing. Other nights magic would happen. Taylor's fingerprints are all over the album, even if he doesn't always get credit for it. On Tumbling Dice, his understated rhythm guitar blended seamlessly with Richards' riffing, creating the loose, rolling groove that defined the song. But it was on tracks like Ventilator Blues and Stop Breaking Down, where Taylor's blues roots truly show. His slide guitar on Stop Breaking Down, a cover of the Robert Johnson classic, carried the weight of the Delta blues, but with a modern bite. Taylor didn't just replicate the traditional slide techniques, he expanded on them, adding flourishes that hinted at rock, jazz and gospel. Ventilator Blues was a song born out of the oppressive heat and claustrophobia of the basement sessions. The air at Nelcote was thick with humidity and tension, and the recording process often reflected that. Taylor's slide work on the track moaned and groaned, as if mimicking the suffocating atmosphere in the room. "That song was about feeling trapped," Richards said. "We were stuck in that basement, sweating and arguing, but Mick's playing gave it that raw, guttural edge." Despite the album's fragmented recording process, the result was a masterpiece. Exile on Main Street was released in May 1972 as a double album, and though its initial reception was mixed, it has since been regarded as one of the greatest rock albums of all time. Taylor's role in its creation was crucial, even if it wasn't always acknowledged. "He brought depth to Exile," Jagger later said. "Without him, it wouldn't have had that richness." But the chaos of the sessions took a toll on Taylor. The drug-fueled environment, the lack of structure, and the growing tensions within the band began to weigh on him. "I wasn't built for that lifestyle," Taylor admitted. "I love the music, but everything else around it was starting to get to me." The Stones hit the road in 1972 for their infamous North American tour, often referred to as the Stones Touring Party, or simply STP. It was a circus of excess, private jets, hotel room destruction, and parties that stretched until dawn. The tour became as legendary for its backstage antics as for the performances themselves. But on stage, Taylor was at his peak. Every night, he delivered searing solos that expanded on the studio versions of songs like Gimme Shelter and Midnight Rambler. The latter, a staple of their live set, became a showcase for Taylor's ability to navigate the song's shifting dynamics. He could move from a whisper to a scream within a single passage, making the audience feel every ounce of menace in the lyrics. Richards and Taylor developed a unique onstage chemistry. While Richards held down the rhythm, often slashing away at his chords like a man hacking through a dense forest, Taylor floated above him, weaving melodic lines that felt almost transcendent. "He had the ability to take the music somewhere else," Jagger said. "You could feel it when he played. He wasn't just playing notes, he was telling a story." But the excess of the tour wasn't without consequence. Taylor, who had remained relatively clean during his time with John Mayall, found himself drawn into the band's lifestyle. Cocaine and heroin were readily available, and Taylor struggled to maintain his composure. "I started to lose control," he admitted. "It was hard to keep up with that level of madness." As the dust settled from the Exile tour, the Stones returned to the studio to record Goat's Head Soup. The album marked a shift in tone, moving away from the raw energy of Exile toward a more polished, introspective sound. Taylor's contributions were once again vital, particularly on tracks like Winter and 100 Years Ago. Winter is often considered one of Taylor's finest moments with the band. His lead guitar weaves through the song like a gentle snowfall, adding warmth and texture to Jagger's melancholic vocals. The solo is lyrical and tender, capturing the longing and sadness that permeate the lyrics. "That solo is pure emotion," Richards said. Mick poured his heart into it. But by this point, Taylor's frustrations were beginning to boil over. Despite his significant contributions, he was rarely given songwriting credit. Taylor's work on Goat's Head Soup showcased his versatility, but it also underscored the brewing tension within the band. On 100 Years Ago, a track that starts with a wistful, almost nostalgic tone before morphing into a funky, jam-like outro, Taylor's soloing takes center stage. His lines dance between delicate phrasing and bursts of bluesy aggression, lifting the song from its reflective verses into something unpredictable. His solos weren't premeditated, they were reactions to the moment, which gave the songs a living, breathing quality. Yet, even as his playing reached new heights, Taylor was beginning to feel stifled. He had been an integral part of the band's sound for years, but the Jagger-Richards songwriting partnership remained firmly in control of the credits. While tracks like Sway and Moonlight Mile bore his distinct musical fingerprint, Taylor's name was often absent from the official credits. "I was young, and I didn't want to rock the boat," he said in a later interview, "but it was frustrating. I felt like I was contributing as much as anyone else." His dissatisfaction wasn't purely about recognition, it was about creative ownership. He wanted to write, to be acknowledged as more than just a session guitarist. But the Stones weren't built for that kind of democracy. Jagger and Richards had carved out their partnership long before Taylor arrived, and they weren't about to change their system now. As Taylor grew increasingly frustrated, his connection to the band began to fray. The tension wasn't just confined to the studio. The band's lifestyle had reached new extremes. Cocaine and heroin were as much a part of the recording process as guitars and microphones, and the constant cycle of touring and partying was wearing Taylor down. "I felt like I was trapped in a machine," he admitted. "There was no time to stop and think." Despite the personal struggles, Goat's Head Soup was a commercial success. Released in 1973, it topped the charts in both the UK and the US, driven by the success of singles like Angie.
Where will it lead us from here?
But while the album sold well, it didn't receive the same critical acclaim as its predecessors. Many felt that the Stones were beginning to lose their edge, and Taylor, already feeling disconnected, began to question his place within the band. By the time the band began working on It's Only Rock and Roll, in late 1973, Taylor's departure was all but inevitable. The sessions were strained, with Taylor often feeling sidelined. "It felt like they were shutting me out," he said. "I'd show up to the studio, but half the time, decisions had already been made." His frustration wasn't just with the lack of songwriting credits, it was with the band's overall dynamic. He was tired of the drugs, the infighting, and the lack of creative freedom. Despite the tension, Taylor still delivered moments of brilliance. Time Waits for No One, one of the standout tracks on It's Only Rock and Roll, is often considered his farewell statement. The song's reflective lyrics: "Yes, star-crossed in pleasure, the stream flows on by. Yes, as we're sated in leisure, we watch it fly," carry an air of melancholy, and Taylor's solo, which dominates the latter half of the track, is a masterpiece of lyrical guitar playing. His phrasing is delicate and fluid, as though he's bidding a quiet goodbye. The notes stretch and bend, creating a sense of longing that lingers long after the song fades. Time Waits for No One could almost be seen as Taylor's exit letter, a final statement before he walked away from the chaos that had consumed him. Jagger later admitted that the song wouldn't have been the same without Taylor. "He gave it that emotional depth," Jagger said. "We could all feel it." Taylor's final live performance with the Stones took place on December 14th, 1974, at a gig in the Netherlands. There was no grand farewell, no public announcement. Taylor simply left. "I had to get out," he said. "I couldn't do it anymore." The band, caught off guard by his sudden departure, initially hoped he would reconsider. "We thought he'd cool off and come back," Richards admitted. But Taylor didn't return. He had made up his mind, and the Stones, unwilling to wait, quickly moved on. Ron Wood, a close friend of the band and a member of the Faces, was brought in as Taylor's replacement.
I said, "Would you join?" I said, "Of course I would, in a minute, but I don't want to let the Faces down." He said, "No, I don't want to split that up." He said, "Either." He said, "I'm in a real predicament."
Wood's chemistry with Richards made him an ideal fit.
When Ronnie walked in the room, just played by numbers. That's it, it's obvious. Everybody else was up for the gig.
But his style was a departure from Taylor's melodic precision.
Yeah, I was quite surprised that Mick wanted to leave the band, but here they are.
It's a shame, really, just personally, because I enjoy playing with him very much.
The reasons behind Taylor's departure weren't singular. They were a complex mix of creative frustration, personal struggles, and the toxic environment that surrounded the band. At its core, Taylor's decision to leave was driven by a sense of artistic suffocation. He had joined the Stones as a young, eager guitarist, but by 1974, He felt like a cog in a machine that was moving too fast for him to control.
Now, was being in the Stones a great gig or was it hell?
It was both. Heaven and hell. Roller coaster ride. No, but seriously, it was mostly a lot of fun, but towards the end of my period with the Stones, it got very laborious and monotonous.
The lack of songwriting credit was a major source of contention. Taylor had contributed significantly to tracks like Sway, Moonlight Mile, and Time Waits for No One, yet his name was often absent from the credits. It wasn't just about the money, Taylor explained, it was about recognition. I wanted to feel like I was part of the creative process. The drug use also played a role. While Taylor wasn't immune to the temptations of the rock and roll lifestyle, he wasn't as deeply entrenched as some of his bandmates.
Certain people's addiction to drugs didn't help, and really became very difficult, especially for Mick Jagger.
But the constant exposure to heroin and cocaine, coupled with the pressure to perform night after night, took its toll. I wasn't built for that kind of life, he admitted. I needed to step back and take care of myself. There were also personal factors at play. Taylor's marriage was under strain, and he wanted to spend more time with his family. The endless cycle of touring, recording, and partying had left little room for a stable home life. I was losing myself, he said. I needed to get back to who I was before all of this. Taylor's departure marked the end of what many consider the Stones' golden era. But for Taylor, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with both triumphs and challenges. He embarked on a solo career, releasing his self-titled debut album in 1979, which showcased his signature blend of blues, rock, and jazz. Though the album received positive reviews, it didn't achieve commercial success, and Taylor struggled to find his footing in a music industry dominated by larger-than-life personalities. He spent the next few decades performing with various artists, including Bob Dylan, Jack Bruce, and John Mayall, but he never reached the same level of fame he had experienced with the Stones. Part of this was by choice. Taylor wasn't interested in chasing stardom. I never wanted to be a rock star, he said. I just wanted to play. Looking back, it's clear that Taylor's time with the Rolling Stones wasn't just a chapter in the band's history, it was a defining era. His playing on Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street helped shape the band's most acclaimed work, and his ability to balance technical brilliance with emotional depth remains unparalleled. Even decades after his departure, Taylor's influence lingers. Songs like Can't You Hear Me Knocking and Time Waits for No One are permanent fixtures in the band's legacy, and live performances of Midnight Rambler often evoke comparisons to Taylor's searing solos. Jagger once admitted that Taylor's contributions were undervalued at the time. We didn't give him enough credit, he said. He brought something none of us could, and when he left, we knew we'd never have it again. For many fans, the Mick Taylor years remain the band's artistic peak, a brief but brilliant moment when everything aligned, and the music transcended the chaos that created it. In the end, Taylor didn't need the spotlight to make his mark. His guitar spoke for him, and the echoes of those notes can still be heard in every corner of rock history.
Thank you very much. See you later. Thank you.